Hi everyone, welcome to round 2 of the Fine Art Fever Challenge. This is a challenge set by McKay Williamson to various artists to make a painting in an hour. Last time I did a portrait of my daughter May, and this was in colour. Today I'd like to make a painting in black and white or monochrome. And it's going to be of hands and something that we're all doing a lot of at the moment, and that's washing hands. So through this process, I'd like to show mark making, different ways to apply paint, and also really we're only dealing with tone, so there's not the problem of colour particularly. Through this challenge, we're hoping to highlight the good work done by the NHS and the NSPCC at this very challenging time. And hopefully all of these works at the end of this project will be auctioned off for charity, primarily for the NHS, and hopefully we can raise some money for them. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to do is show you my palette. So last time out there was an array of colours all around the palette. Today I've mixed my own black. If I can show you this. So the first thing I did was mix my own black. So as you can see there, you see that? And this is basically a mixture of very dark brown, which is burnt umber in my case, a Prussian blue, and some lake yellow, which is basically a transparent yellow. And the other big pile there is just literally white. And I've mixed that down with a little bit of medium. So it's very simple today. The two little pots are very, very thin mixture of each. And I'll get to those towards the end of the painting. So today I'd like to take the process a little bit further as well. So last time it was about getting paint on and building the picture. This time I'd like to manipulate the surface of the painting a little bit more. So the first thing I'm going to do is work on this background. I want these to be very much about light against dark. So the hands being the main event, the water as well being quite light. Again, something that's almost black. Probably will be black. So the first thing I'm going to do is put some marks around the hands. So I'm working from this picture today. So again, very simple, but I love the way that the water plays on top of the hand, the way it falls away at the bottom. And this is where I think I can really play around with paint. So as long as you've got the structure of the hand and the hand looks like a hand, I think I can really sort of go to town with the ways in which we can make that sort of watery effect work around the hands. So to start with, I'm going to pick out these dark areas. So I'm literally very simply putting them in very big marks, not too worried about the edges, and I'm going to work that around. So we're going above the arm as well. Very simple, big marks, just to highlight where everything else is going to sit. So very, very big marks. Not being too precious about where the paint goes. If we go over the edge, it doesn't really matter. I just really want to put an outline around them. So again, around here, bringing the wrist off. And the thing I like about this as well is that because inevitably hands are attached to arms, they have to go somewhere. And the idea of this is that the arm disappears off the edge, again with this wrist here, so that your eye will hopefully bring you into the picture. And so where it's all happening here, your eye will initially take you through this arm and then straight to where all the sort of water and the movement's happening. So again, we'll carry on putting some, what is effectively very dark blue. And you'll see that more when I add some of the lighter colours. You'll get to see some of the bluey green coming through. And you can mix this black. I never use black out of a tube. It seems so very dead at times. So I always try and mix a very blue black or a very green black, sometimes a purple black or even a red black. But each time I'm just trying to push the colour a little bit. So although it can sit and it's very dark, if I add other things to it, it will bring out the colour in it. And so it won't be lifeless. So we keep going around here. Just trying to pick out those fingers a little bit. Block this out. So I'm not too fussed either about going too far to the edge. I'm quite happy to keep it sort of contained in the middle for now. If I feel I need to take away all of the white, then I will do. But I'm just going to try and give an outline to these hands, and then we can work on this really sort of important area in the middle there. Again, the white this time, I've just used a very, very straightforward titanium white mixed down. So it's not, sometimes I'll put colour into the white as well. So I'd put maybe a yellow or something warmer into the white. But today I thought it might work better if it was just plain white. And hopefully it'll pick up bits of the background colour as we go along. So again, below here. And it may be that as I work on the hands, I may need to add a bit more dark to the background to sort of stop it interfering with what's happening with the hands themselves, but we'll see as we go along. Effectively, painting for me is a process that's always in flux, it's always in play. So until the last marks on the canvas, I see it as a very open thing. I'm not trying to refine as I go along necessarily. I'm trying to build and build and build and maybe take away, build again, take away. Okay, so we've got a rough idea of where the hands and the bit of tap at the top there. So the next thing to do would be to look at these hands. And actually, with that being so dark, there's very little that's as dark as that. There's something here that is quite dark, and there's something in here which is quite nice, which will give a great contrast. So that can be that dark as well. And then the rest really is about more subtle tones. So the next thing I'm going to look to is a tone in between, somewhere between the very lightest and the very darkest. So I'm looking at this area here on the wrist, which is a lovely sort of mid-tone. So I'm going to try and mix that up. I'm definitely not going to overmix the paint. This will be, I'd like some of the dark running through the lighter colours. So again, that can go in there. And now you get to see the colour of the black. And again, you can run that along, tiny bit more white in it as we go over the top of the hand. And then that very same tone is running under here as well, which is it is a shadow, but it's also slightly lit. So it's not going to be as dark as the background. So we can mix that up. We'll run that under there. Very simply. And again, these can be tweaked as they go along. So I'll lighten areas, I'll darken areas. And so now I'm looking elsewhere for that tone, and I'm seeing it here as well. And the great thing about working in black and white is you really aren't thinking about the issues that colour brings, you know, and the options that colour brings. So again, now I'm looking under here and this part here, and I'm seeing that actually there's something that comes very dark there, but then lightens as we go along. So I'll just run something under there to give us a sense of the hand on top. There we go. And then something a little lighter underneath. Not much, just a bit. There we go. And we can go darker again. So I'm not trying to refine it. It's all very simple. It's almost blocks of light and dark. So again, now I'm looking at the lights thinking, okay, so we've got some darker tones, but let's think about these lights here. And they're almost the same tone as the canvas itself. But I think I'd like a touch of colour in there. So just a tiny, tiny bit of the dark. And I'm going to just simply run this in. And then again, on top through to there. And now actually the water can go in as well, because that again is so light. And I think we're going to center the water maybe when I start to manipulate the surface of the paint a little bit more. So again, I don't mind it picking up some of the other colour. It can do plenty of that if it wants to, because it'll all add to the picture. So we get a sense that the water's there. It doesn't look very fluid at the moment, but it will do. And then I'm looking at the top of the hand there. And there's something very light there. So this is going to go in here. Very light. And then the tops of fingers. So we're looking at this area here. And then I'm looking at the top of this hand, thinking, well, actually, it's not quite as light as this. So it needs to be somewhere in between that and that. So this can go in there. There is a tiny bit of lighter in there as well, just on the tip of this bit. So now I'm looking at this area of the wrist. I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty light as well. Let's get that in. And then it gets a little bit darker again. And that can be run through there. And then I'm thinking, well, actually, that tone's here as well. And I'm literally just dealing with shapes. I'm just thinking, what shape is that bit? What shape is that bit? And we've got a lot of water running off the bottom of the hand. And I think toning, I should put that in just to give us a sense of what's going on there. So again, it's not light because it's actually under the hand. So it's in partial darkness. So it's just off. And I'm not trying to paint it as water at the moment. This is literally just going to be some marks that can represent water as we go along. And again, under here. And then there's some here as well. And there's quite a big, it's really running down the back of the hand and the wrist. Slowly but surely it's coming together. So again, now I'm looking back here again, thinking actually where the thumb and the back of the thumb goes in, there's a slight bit of shadow that is actually darker than this, but not quite as dark as that. So I'll mix that up. So that can go under there. It just sits, and it's probably a touch darker again. It's very subtle though. It's not quite as dark as the back, as the background. So again, next to that, then you've got this lovely sort of low light that runs underneath here, and we should get some. I mean, again, it's not light. It's not white. It's something because it's again so much darkness. It looks lighter than actually it is. So again, now I think we need to start to look at this area here. Maybe I can then start to get the thumb looking like a thumb. So there's a lovely bit of light coming under the thumb into this part of the hand. So we'll get that in. And that's very light. There we go. And then next to that is a very dark section, which is the thumb itself. And that comes in here. And then that runs down actually to there. So very simple shapes. And then I can see that that's happening here as well, around where it joins the wrist. So we can run that through to there. And then that comes up again into here. Not overcomplicating this at all. It's as simple as I can possibly make it at the moment. It's slowly coming together. So we know that that's very dark. The hand above, now that what's next to that is slightly lighter again. We can run that through there. And then above that, slightly lighter again. But hopefully by doing separate marks like this, the eye will actually do the work of mixing these things together to make an overall picture in your brain of the tone of the thing. So I'm looking at all of these fingers now, thinking, right, okay, let's get some dark underneath here as well. And there's some through there. And actually, that's picking up some from the background, which is really quite nice. So there's very little darker tones to go in through this hand. But I'm noticing here there's something that is not this, which is very light, but also not this. So again, something slightly lighter again. I'm going to mix that up. It sits just here. Slightly more subtle. It runs down into here as well. And then at the back of this hand, there's a little bit of shadow that sort of shapes the back of the thumb. I'll bring that through. Again, a bit darker. Runs darker down there. There we go. And then again, there's some dark that runs through there as well. And this is going into the wrist and the. There we go. And again, a bit darker. Yep. There we go. And lighter on top. And this is where you start to reevaluate some of the tones you put in at the beginning. So this needs to be dark. It needs to be much lighter. And again, I'm thinking now about this space here, which has got water in it, but I think I'm going to have to go a little bit darker, because otherwise what I don't want to do is lose this finger and the sort of outlines of these fingers. Because when we start to go crazy with a palette knife and even flicking some paint or whatever else we're going to do to make it look like water, I want these still to sit as fingers so they read in your brain that they are still fingers. So let's go a little bit darker there. There we go. Yeah, and that should give us a sense of there's some water happening off the right hand side as well, and I do want to put some of that in just to give us a sense of where it is. Again, just very simply, it's nothing. It's not that descriptive at the moment. The only thing different I'm doing, I'm maybe making the brush marks a little bit more fluid. But later on, I'm going to hopefully make the paint make water itself, you know, actually literally do it itself almost, by being very, very free with it. So the back of the hand here is actually very dark again. I'm going to get that in. There we go. That's good. And then actually this shadow runs across the palm. Very dark. And it runs into here, which is again a little bit lighter. There we go. And this one's over there. And again, there's some very subtle tones on the back of the wrist. Right, so the bulk of it's in. So in terms of blocking the picture, we're nearly there. I'm realising though that actually this white is just going to distract. So I am going to get rid of that. So the next job will be to do that. This time now I'm going to mix it down a little bit with some turpentine. Because the coverage, I want it to cover quickly and lock this in. And again here, just this white is just a little bit distracting from the picture at the moment. And actually, after I've worked on it some more, it may be that we could even work back. I mean, there's things you can do that won't get you back to the white canvas, but can do interesting things. I use a lot of centipede towel, and you can draw back in. There's lots of things you can do that can like lift the paint off and make an interesting mark. Okay, so this is helping. It's helping me sort of narrow down where everything is and how it's working. Right, slowly but surely. Okay, so next thing is to I'm going to try and get some of these fingers looking a little bit more like fingers. At the moment, they look, yeah, not like fingers. So a smaller brush for this. Again, the same principle. That I'm not going to be fiddling around. These are going to be fairly straightforward marks, you know, very, very direct. But I'm looking at the light on top of them first. And I'm looking how light the nails are, especially where the light's hitting them at the top. Also seeing that this area there, slightly darker, and then you've got the shadow here a little bit as well. And then again, this one here, I want to put the middle finger, I'm going very light on the nail, but I'm not trying to colour it in, you know, it is what it is. And then I realised actually this shadow's going to be darker as well, so we need to go back in with that and run that. But the great thing is about working in monochrome, all I've got are 2 piles of colour and everything in between. So I'm not worrying about washing brushes even too much, which is quite a nice change from the usual way of working. So again, I'm looking at extending above the finger here where it goes into the knuckle. And then this is lighter again. So this alongside the shadow. So now I'm looking at this thumb, thinking, right, we need to get this thumb right, because if it doesn't look like a thumb, it's just going to be, the hand will be lost. So I'm just going to try and shape this. There we go. Okay, so then we've got some dark on this side of the nail. And then this side is quite dark, but not as dark again as the background. So then I'm looking at mid-tones that's sitting on top of the thumb. So we've got a tone here that's quite a lot lighter, and then you realise actually it runs quite light to the back of the thumb. So we're starting to get an idea of where the thumb is. And then I'm thinking behind this thumb has to be darker, because although that's another thumb, it's just got to be so much more. It's so much darker. And that way, this should hopefully bring out the thumb above. It's almost black under there, and then on the outside of the hand. So that's starting to bring this away from the hand below and the background. And at the same time, I'm looking at the tap thinking, well, we should probably describe that in some way as well. Just to give it just to make it look a bit like a tap. So again, it's chrome, so I think less is more in terms of putting in what I need to put in on it. There's this lovely shadow running down that side. There's a shadow on this side. And then this side's very light. And then I'll just run that into there for a minute. And then this can all be changed as I go along, but effectively that gives us a top point. So now I'm looking at these fingers. I'd like to get these resolved so they're ready to maybe manipulate. So I could go in with a palette knife maybe and play around with them. This again. So again, that top finger, very light nail where the light's hitting it. Light going through the top of the finger, and then there's even the little finger above, but that's very light, so we can just lighten that there. So it's pretty much in terms of being blocked in. It's pretty much there. I'd like to work on that knuckle a little bit, and there's 1 or 2 other things that I think need playing around with, but they can happen as I go along. And again, all of these decisions at the moment are tonal. You know, there's none of the sort of anxiety that colour can bring. I think even to experienced artists, you know, colour can be very problematic sometimes. Let's get this again. This needs to be a touch darker. That shadow above there. So again, let's have a look at it on the screen. We're starting to see the hands. There's a bit of work needs to be done down here. There's some light through there on the back of the thumb. There we go. Now again, there's a lovely sort of almost highlight, like a reflected light that goes at the back of there as well, at the back of the thumb, which helps give shape to the thumb. And darker again in there, underneath that. I'm thinking that this needs to be a bit bigger here. It just looks a bit round at the moment. So the one thing that's harder to do at the moment, with there being a camera, is the room to move back. I often go right back constantly, to and fro, to and fro. So I'd evaluate it, come back, evaluate it, come back. Sometimes I do it more than others, but I think we're okay today. So it's pretty much blocked in, I think. Pretty happy with that. So the next bit, I would start to think about what I want to change about it. And it's usually quite a lot. So obviously this process normally would take, I mean, the initial phase of blocking in paint can last a day. So if you think that we've done half an hour on this, I would be taking a lot more time over it. But to try and get you to the next, to show you the next stage, I think is really important, because it's often the thing that defines my work is the next bit. So the hands are there. Everyone knows they look like hands. They're not the most resolved hands, but they're thereabouts. So what I'm going to do now is start to look at maybe manipulating some of this paint with a palette knife to try and create different marks. See if we can't do something different with the way the paint feels on the hands. So I've obviously got a range of knives, different sizes. I tend to use sort of that kind of size, sometimes a little bit smaller. But for this scale painting, I think big is best. Again, it stops me being too precious about. So I should show you the palette actually. So the palette looks, to this point, now we've done that, the palette now looks like that, which is, I love palettes. I love looking at palettes. So sometimes I'd scrape it down, sometimes I'd leave it. And when I'm working in monochrome, I would literally scrape it into a ball and use it again. So, you know, because you're picking up some dark, some light, and it's almost like a mixture of strands of color. And I thought, well, that can sometimes be a great thing to even throw onto a picture. So, for example, if we're trying to get a scent of water, the more fluid you can apply the paint, the better. To try and colour in water is virtually impossible because it's such an elusive substance. So that's what I'm going to try and create here. But along the way to doing that, I need to know that these certain things are obviously what they are, so that when your eyes look at them, you see hands, fingers, and also the carnage and the chaos and all the splatter and everything else. So I sometimes spend 10, 15 minutes looking at what I can do. So where I'm going to attack the canvas. I think today, the first thing is clearly, I want to have a go at this water. Because at the moment, it's just this, it's like it's coming out like Play-Doh. So let's see if I can get into that and see if I can carve that up a little bit. So I'm thinking of getting some of this background into it because I'm essentially going to apply more and more paint. So I'm thinking, well, let's just see what it does. So, okay. So there we go. Already you get a slightly different sense of what that mark is doing. I'm not too worried about what's happening with the fingers and the hands because we know where they are. I can always get them back. This hand at the bottom looks fairly clunky. It's all a bit heavy. And so I'm going to go into that as well. I'm just going to break it up. So looking to see what I can do with the paint. Not overthink it. But it suggests things and it picks paint up and it moves it and it moves it in a way that a paintbrush can't do sometimes. You know, paintbrush can't do everything. You know, it doesn't matter how dexterous you are. You know, fingers do things that other things can't do. Palette knives do things. You know, you spray paint. It does stuff that you just can't do with a brush. It doesn't matter how eloquent you are with it. So also I'm looking at the background thinking, it's a bit flat, it's a bit dead. So I'm going to move some of that around as well. I'm going to move some of it into here. So I picked some up on my palette knife already, and I want to start moving it around a bit more. So this line here looks utterly clunky, so we're going to tear into that as well. Now this is water here, but it looks nothing like water, so we'll get back into that as well, and we can see whether we can move some of that around. So again, now we're looking at this top bit of the hand, which is it's almost like a very distinct band of white, but it's too white. It's too on its own. It doesn't connect at all with what's going on around it. It feels like somebody sliced along there, and the top bit's, you know, in sunshine, and the bottom bit's not. So I want to try and move that around as well. So I'm thinking, well, we just put some colour through it just for now. Start to look at what this can do. Okay, so that's just made it a bit more interesting. And then I'm looking at the fingers, thinking, well, we should probably do something with them. This colour here is really this bit here is really irritating. So again, you still get a sense that they're hands, but they're starting to become another pair of hands now, something different. So they've taken on a little bit of a life of their own. So I'm just trying to think about how I can connect the hands with the background, bring the background into the hands. I'm looking at this tap thinking, well, that's pretty dull. So we can move that around a little bit. So again, I don't need the tap to be a tap. The tap can just be a thing that looks like something that the water's coming out of. It doesn't need to be an actual tap. So now we've got areas where we think the water could be. Now I'm thinking that there's an enormous amount of light that hits this water on top of the hand. I'm thinking we're going to have to apply some paint to make that do something. First of all, I'd like to play around with these fingers a little bit. Just a little bit. So the tops of the fingers. This bit here. Because these can be redefined quite easily. And then that thumb needs something. That's not doing what I want it to do. So again, I just pick some paint up on the knife and maybe put another mark in. There we go. It just gives it a sense of the light again. And again, actually, I'm looking now and thinking, well, actually, there's a bit here as well that needs to be bolder and bigger and brighter. Okay, so now it's been broken up a little. And actually, scraping does some interesting things onto the background as well. But I don't want that to be the main event. So now I'm thinking, right, okay, let's get these buckets of paint that I've made. I'm thinking white first. So these are just mixed down very loosely. So it's literally dripping. It's not so fluid that it will just fall away. It's got a little bit more body than that. But I'm thinking, right, okay, let's see what we can do in this area here. So one way of doing it would be to throw the paint on, which would be a very risky thing to do when you're doing a live feed. So I'm probably not going to throw it on completely. I'm going to try and do it with a brush. Find the right brush. Okay. Right, so we're looking at this water here. So again, I want to sense that the water's happening rather than being painted. I don't want to overdo it. because obviously if you're not too careful, it can look contrived. And actually this, there is a sense there that it's doing something. I wonder whether there's a bit more there. There's definitely some here. So it just gives a slightly more fluid and less obvious look to where the water is. And then actually it comes down. So you know, you're looking at bits that are falling off. I don't want to paint droplets particularly, but you know, you've got to imply that they're there, I suppose. And I'm also now looking at the hand itself, thinking, right, how can we use some slightly more fluid paint to get some of it into the hand? So I'm looking at the back of this. So we can maybe just pick that out again a little bit now. We can look at that bit here again. And we'll get splashes and you get drips and you get things like that going on, but it all adds to the texture. So often I get to this point now and I'm thinking, okay, I want to somehow involve the dark again, maybe more fluidly. So I look to the other pot mixed paint. And this is again very fluid. Very, very fluid. I need a bigger brush. And as much as possible, I'm trying to stay with big brushes. I'm trying not to get too bogged down and bringing in tiny little things. There might be a bit of that at the end, but there won't be much of it. So I'm thinking, right, okay, so the background. It may be that something here. And because it's so fluid, it will leave, again, a different kind of texture to the top of the paint surface. Whereas paint out of a tube is often quite, depending on the paint, obviously, some are more buttery than others, but it can leave a sort of slightly grainy feel. Whereas when you mix it down like this, it will give another texture again. I want to knock that back. I'm thinking now as well, we can bring this into here. Help shape that hand. See that? I think it needs to go in. There it is. And I'm thinking now this shadow, oddly enough, now needs to be slightly more definite. So I'm going to get this here, where that's interfering with that. I just need to bring that back a bit. Okay. So now I think what I'm going to do is try and figure out how to get. There's a point here where the water hits the hand. So it's not just going straight down, it's hitting something and then splashing off, which is causing all of this stuff. So I want something here which is fluid, but slightly more frothy, is the word, and still. So I'm going to mix actually a little bit of both. So it's going to be fluid and there's going to be some of the other white as well. And see whether this will do something that's slightly different. Okay, so I'm loading the palette knife. So this is going to be as much as I can get on it without dropping it. So you can see from this, it's quite loaded. And I think it just needs to sit here somehow. There we go. It's just a little bit better. It just looks a bit less like it's just flowing through the hand itself. It's bouncing around on the picture. There's no doubt. So now, actually, I'm thinking now. Okay, so that's pretty lively. I think what needs to happen now is to do something to bring it all back together again now. So I'm starting to think, right, okay, we need those fingers to really look like fingers. In my way, obviously, I'm not trying to polish them. I'm not trying to make them look like I've not made them, but they do need to be described slightly more. So maybe that thumb as well, actually. So we're going to go back in. I love the tap. I'm happy with the tap. I think that comes across quite well. That's all that needs to be. The splashing, yeah, that is what it is. That's fine. There's an area here I might play around with a little bit, but I like to look at these fingers now. And I am going to go to a slightly smaller brush. So brush, yeah, let's have a look. So I'm looking at this thumb thinking, how do we give shape to that? At the moment, it just feels a little bit like it's being pressed down when it's not actually, it's in air. So I want to try and just put a little bit of definition in there. So certainly something here. And then some dark underneath. So this definitely tapers here. A bit more than I've done it. And then it comes in here. So actually, I'll go dark again. Bring it right in. And it comes darker across the top as well. And actually there's a few marks that suggest lines. It just needs to feel a little bit more three-dimensional. It just doesn't feel quite right. Maybe that'll help. And sometimes the options are so variable to do something with it that you don't always take the right option at the right time. It needs sometimes to be refined and played around with. And I'm seeing here as well. There's effectively the back of the knuckle here. So I'm thinking there's something slightly darker there. And it's just these little things now to try and make the hand look a touch more like the hand should, without it being obvious. So that shadow does need to be quite, because it actually it's quite descriptive. But also I'm looking at this now thinking this has got to be so much lighter. It's too dark. Because actually it goes darker again underneath. And then that light here needs to come back in. And then we can put the dark back under the thumb again. So slowly it's coming together, and we can see actually that this line is actually quite clear key as well. And it's those tiny little bits of sharpness sometimes that can give a sense of accuracy. The idea that the looseness and the abandon with a little bit of accuracy can give such a nice cohesive look. And again, the hand underneath now, I need to find a way to try and make that look a bit more like the hand should look. I think this is key. There's a bit of shadow under there that needs to be looked at. So there's a shadow that runs around under there, which helps. There's also a bit of shadow here under the ball of the thumb. And then there's some light here underneath, which I think we need to get in, because that's the edge of the thumb. So now we can look at the ends of these fingers. And again, like we did with the thumb, I'm thinking, right, okay, and actually I've just seen nothing on the thumb. I'm not trying to fiddle, but it's little things sometimes can make such a difference. Again, this needs to be lighter over the top. So let's look at this finger first. So it's very light on the end, very, very light. And then we bring in some shape to it. So this here. And there is a little bit of a low light underneath, a bit of a reflective color. Just tiny bit down. And then the one above It's a very similar thing. This needs very little at all, I think, actually. This just needs the shape of the nail going in. And then we could look at maybe the shadow underneath being a bit lighter, and maybe a touch more light on top there. And as the process goes on, and as you start to work back into a picture, you find that the paint starts to pick up even more of what's already there. So as you're making a mark that you think you're making, all of a sudden it's making something else, which is quite nice. It can be challenging at times, but sometimes it is actually quite nice to see that happening. I'm getting there. So again, this top one here, I'd like to get a bit more definition in it. I'm going to bring a bit more light around just to give the end of the finger a little bit more shape. There we go. And possibly this shadow here is maybe a bit much. So maybe we could just take that back a little bit. And again, on top, there's a little bit there as well. And actually, it's smaller, possibly smaller things now. You're looking at, well, how can I make that look like that? How can I make this hand a bit more refined, maybe? Although I like the looseness, I like the energy, I like the sort of play on movement. Even the tap looks quite fluid. It looks like it's moving, which is what we want. I think here actually needs to be a touch lighter again. So we could do that, bring that out. So this can, again, just pick that up a little bit. And possibly through here as well. So you've got a bit more light there. So we can paint it. There we go. And actually there's possibly an area here that could be lighter. But I don't want it to look too stark with this. So I don't want it to go from light to dark like a line. So maybe I'll leave that for now. There's possibly a bit more light down here in this palm. Just bring a bit through there. And actually then you're looking at this area thinking, oh, that's actually more of a mid-tone, so I need a bigger brush. So we're looking at something that's not that light, but not too dark. And it would just bring out that area there below the thumb. There's just a tiny bit of light. A bit lighter there. There we go. It gives the thumb a bit more shape, a little bit more. There's actually a low light here, which will help as well. How's it looking on the screen? Yeah, it's coming together. And now, of course, you realise that the possibilities are endless, because you can think, well, obviously this is a tap in a sink. You could put a bit of architecture in a way. For example, if the picture felt like it was sliding off to the left, you could maybe put a line of, like stainless steel sort of basin rim that would, again, just give it something that would just jig it about a little bit and perhaps alter the composition a little. But these are things that can happen later on, I think, rather than, I think if you're not careful, you end up getting bogged down with all of this early on and you don't actually paint very much. And you end up just almost readjusting a drawing. So again, I'm just looking at little things thinking, yeah, how could that be better? How could that work? Does that go off to the left as I want it to? So I'm looking at this here now, really, and thinking, well, it's kind of a funny mark. Do I want to break into that again? maybe bring some paint across it and see if we can't disrupt that slightly. I'm pretty pleased. I'm pleased with the fingers. Pleased with the thumbs kind of working. This could do with more shape. It just feels a little bit like it's a bit light. It's not quite physically doing what I'd like it to. It may be that lightening the wrist area here might help a little, just to give a bit more shape to this bit and a bit more dark. And also, actually, this bit here is too dark. So let's lighten that a touch into there. And actually then that can become darker on the back and it gives it a bit more shape again. So this bit here can, that's better. Yeah. You see, this then looks heavy. Right. Problems. And then there's a shape here that comes in. And then maybe if I bring the dark through round under the thumb, that should come out even more, hopefully. So this really is bothering me, this bit here. I'm going to get rid of it. So again, I'm just going to pick up some paint, a bit of, it's not too fluid because I don't want it just to wash into it. So I'm going to go, I just want it to not be so definite. But again, now it's just interfering so much with what's going on above it. So the obvious thing to do would be to just literally pour it on like that. And then as it drips off, you can sort of work it across a little bit. Okay. So yeah, so you could just gently. So that's all about touch. So now instead of dragging it, quite aggressively with the brush, with the palette knife, I've done it very gently. So it's almost just sat on top of the paint because it's so fluid. If I push it too hard, it will literally just make a mess. It will just become sludge. But I'm aware that that doesn't need to be dark there either. But this is a constant play between, you'll notice I sort of dot around a lot around a picture because I'm thinking, well, how does that work with that? How does that work with that? How does that work with that? And it's all about rhythm and balance. And so actually, if you're not careful, what I don't want is this to be dull and boring and then this bit to be quite exciting. You want it in some way for it all to work symbiotically, really. So now actually this green line, when it is green, the way it comes through on the canvas, it's hard to see on this because you've got a bit of reflected light, but actually it's starting to interfere with the picture plane. So I'm going to get rid of that a little bit. There we go. Let's do it again. There. There we go. That's better. So it's starting to come together. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a close-up. Right. Here we go. So what I'd like to do is just show you some of the more, you can see here where I did threw the paint on, you get a sense of, with a bit of light flickering on it, a bit of a sense of the sort of texture of these bits. And again, where I did that section in the middle there, hopefully it's giving a bit more texture and a bit more life of its own that water would have and always has. So again, each, in a way, without being too contrived, you want each brush mark to almost do something different. So it's all the layers of complication that come with trying to make a picture. You're often trying to juggle where the mark goes, what kind of mark, what the colour looks like, what the tone is, how it affects everything else around it. And you're making thousands of decisions based on all of those things. It's a little bit easier with monochrome because you are only dealing with tone. But there's still all the issue with, is that light enough? Is it dark enough? Can you get a sense of that finger being there? Is it in front of something? Is it behind something? Hopefully, I think we're getting there. I do like these paintings as well to be quite immediate. So although I wouldn't obviously work as quickly as this quite, I am very keen on them having a sense of immediacy and life and rhythm and freshness. I like the layer of the paint to look fresh, like it's all gone on in one go. And actually, while I've been talking, I've been looking at this here and realising that actually it's quite flat. So I'm going to find a way of putting a bit more tone through there again. Again, I don't want it to be black. I don't want it to be too definite either. But it does need, something's definitely happening there. But then, of course, it's got to be broken up because otherwise it just goes into this big sort of U shape. So something has to happen there. And then, again, it just needs to be broken up occasionally. And not be too much of an edge. There we go. Let's get it. Yeah, that's nearly there. Again, under this, the temptation is to put water through here as well, but I worry that I'll lose the definition of the two fingers by lightening this area here. So I'm going to leave that. It is tempting to do it, but I'm not going to do it. And again, play around with this. I could play with that for days, probably. At the moment, it just looks a little bit stiff, a little bit flat. And I think what it is that, obviously, maybe breaking it like that helps. Does that help? Yeah, there we go. But then, of course, having done that, I'm now looking at this bit thinking, it's a bit dull as well. So, but that's something that you can play around with. And then actually there's a sort of a low light here. So I'm going to put something in. I don't need it. And again, here, there's something onto the wrist. And it just adds a little bit of information. And then I'm looking, thinking, well, maybe this water here, actually that is water there. That's not hand. The hand actually ends here. So this is where, so the hand does end there. So that's got to go in there. Just to give it a bit of edge. There we go. And so I don't mind the carnage of the water here. Actually works quite nicely. You can give it shape or not. I'm not that bothered actually. Potential to add some more, I suppose. Maybe here somewhere. And what I'd quite like to do is try and get some of that background working through it. I mean, you're never going to get perfect spots of water. And I don't really want that too much, but just a little idea that it's happening everywhere. I think we're there, you know. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring the screen around. There we go. See whether that helps in terms of, yeah, that's better. Just gives you a sense of it straight on, which is the way that I'm seeing it. And although it's very difficult, it's so wet, you're getting some, you know, sort of side light and raking light and things like that. But actually, you know, that's not, I think I'm pretty happy with that. So there we go. So round 2 of Fine Art Fever completed. The challenge to paint a picture in an hour. All of these pictures will be auctioned for charity for the NSPCC and of course the brilliant NHS. So if you want to leave any messages or you'd like to contact McKay Williamson, go to their page. But hopefully, I'll see you next time.